London, June 1816. The summer that refused to arrive brought rain instead. Day after day, week after week, the skies over London wept as if mourning some celestial tragedy. Charlotte Hartley stood at the entrance of Lady Ashton's townhouse and wondered if the heavens mourned for her as well. 3 weeks, 21 days since her name had become synonymous with scandal, since whispers followed her like shadows, since every door in Mayfair had closed against her. This would be her last attempt. After tonight she would leave London forever, retreat to some obscure corner of England where no one knew the name Charlotte Hartley or the lies Lady Pemberton had spread about her. The ballroom glittered ahead, chandeliers casting warm light over silk gowns and polished floors. Music drifted through the air, a waltz that made her chest ache with longing for a life she'd never have again. Charlotte touched the modest pearl necklace at her throat, her mother's, one of the few pieces Aunt Margaret hadn't needed to sell, and stepped inside. The change was immediate. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. A woman gasped. Charlotte kept her chin high, her hands steady at her sides, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She had done nothing wrong. Nothing. But in the eyes of society, innocence mattered less than accusation. Miss Hartley. Lady Ashton's voice cut through the sudden silence, sharp as glass. The hostess materialized before her, face pale with something between embarrassment and fury. "I was not aware you had received an invitation. I apologize for the presumption, Lady Ashton." Charlotte's voice remained steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "I had hoped—" Charlotte Hartley. Another voice, this one dripping with false sweetness. Lady Pemberton glided forward, resplendent in emerald silk, her eyes cold as winter. "How terribly bold of you to appear here! Lady Ashton, surely you cannot allow this person to remain. Think of your reputation, think of your guests." Charlotte's hands curled into fists. This woman, this beautiful, vindictive woman who had fabricated an entire scandal from nothing more than jealous fantasy. Charlotte had committed no sin beyond existing in the same room as Lord Pemberton at a musicale, beyond receiving a polite compliment on her performance at the pianoforte. But Lady Pemberton had spun that moment into an affair, spread rumours of stolen kisses and secret correspondence, painted Charlotte as a scheming seductress. And London, ever hungry for scandal, had believed every word. "Miss Hartley." Lady Ashton's expression hardened. "I must ask you to leave, immediately." The room blurred at the edges. Charlotte blinked rapidly, refusing to let them see her cry. "Of course, forgive the intrusion." She turned toward the entrance, each step an agony of forced composure. Behind her, conversations resumed, punctuated by barely suppressed laughter. Someone whispered, "Shameless," loud enough for her to hear. Another voice suggested she ought to have more self-respect than to show her face. Charlotte made it to the street before her careful control shattered. Rain fell in sheets, instantly soaking through her carefully arranged hair, her one good evening gown, pale blue silk that had belonged to her mother. She had no carriage waiting, could not afford one. The walk to Aunt Margaret's house would take 40 minutes in good weather. In this deluge, perhaps an hour. She began walking. Water pooled in her slippers within moments. Her hem grew heavy with mud. But Charlotte kept moving, head down against the rain, arms wrapped around herself. Better this than to stand on Lady Ashton's steps and wait for some charitable soul who would never come. Better this than one more moment of their contempt. She had made it perhaps 10 streets when the carriage appeared beside her. "Miss." The voice came from within, male, cultured, concerned. "You cannot possibly continue in this weather." Charlotte didn't look up. "I am perfectly well, thank you. You are soaked through and shivering." The carriage slowed to match her pace. "Please, allow me to offer assistance." "I require no assistance, sir." Her voice cracked on the last word. Humiliating. Everything was humiliating. "I can see that." The man's tone gentled. "But I would feel considerably better if you would accept it regardless." Something in his voice made Charlotte stop. She looked up finally, rain streaming down her face. The carriage door stood open. Inside, a man perhaps 30 years of age regarded her with dark eyes that held no judgment, no pity, only a quiet understanding that made her throat tighten. He was handsome in an austere way, sharp features softened slightly by concern. His clothing marked him as wealthy, his bearing as aristocratic. But there was something else there too, a weariness that matched her own, a recognition of pain. "I do not even know your name, sir." Charlotte's teeth chattered. "James Ashford, Marquess of Ravenwood." He extended a gloved hand. "And you are clearly in need of dry shelter and a warm fire. I make no demands, Miss Hartley, Charlotte Hartley." If the name meant anything to him, he gave no sign. "Miss Hartley, please." Pride warred with practicality. Pride lost. Charlotte accepted his hand and climbed into the carriage, immediately conscious of the water dripping from her gown onto his fine upholstery. "I apologize for the mess." "It's only water." Lord Ravenwood closed the door and rapped on the ceiling. "Where shall I take you?" Charlotte gave the address, a respectable but modest street in a decidedly unfashionable quarter. She saw him note it, file it away, but he made no comment. Instead, he removed his coat and offered it to her. "I cannot. You are shivering badly enough that I can hear your teeth." His tone brooked no argument. "Please." The coat smelled of sandalwood and rain. Charlotte wrapped it around herself, feeling the first stirrings of warmth. They rode in silence for several minutes, the sound of rain on the carriage roof oddly soothing after the chaos of the evening. "You left a ball." It wasn't a question. Charlotte stared at her hands. "Yes. Without a carriage." "I had no carriage to bring me." "I see." Another long pause. Then quietly, "It must have been very bad. Whatever happened in there?" Her eyes burned. "It was nothing that hasn't happened before. I simply thought—" She stopped, shook her head. "It doesn't matter what I thought. It matters to you." Something about his voice, so gentle, so free of the curiosity that usually accompanied questions about her disgrace, broke through her defenses. "I thought perhaps one last time. One last evening of music and light before I left London forever. But I was wrong. There are no more last times for me. Only endings." The carriage stopped. Charlotte looked out to see Aunt Margaret's narrow townhouse, candlelight glowing in the front window. Her aunt would be waiting, worrying. Charlotte stood to leave, remembered the coat, began to remove it. "Keep it for now." Lord Ravenwood's expression remained unreadable. "Return it when you're dry." "I don't know when that will be, my lord." "I'm not concerned." He handed her down from the carriage himself, his grip steady and warm. For a moment they stood in the rain together, and Charlotte had the strangest sensation that he understood exactly what this night had cost her. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't have to stop." "No," he agreed, "but I'm glad I did." The carriage pulled away, leaving Charlotte standing in the rain, wrapped in a stranger's coat, wondering why a marquis would show kindness to London's most scandalous woman. Inside the carriage, James Ashford stared at the water-stained seat and tried to understand why his chest felt tight. The woman, Miss Hartley, had looked at him as if he'd performed some great heroism rather than simple human decency, as if she expected cruelty and found kindness remarkable. He'd been away from London too long, buried in his estate in Hertfordshire, hiding from a world that had once held his fiancée. 5 years since Eleanor's death, and still he avoided ballrooms, dinner parties, anything that reminded him of what he'd lost, of what he'd destroyed by insisting on a wedding date despite dangerous weather, despite her quiet concerns about travelling in early spring. But something about Miss Hartley's expression had pierced through his self-imposed isolation. She knew something of loss, of carrying weight too heavy for one person. He could see it in her eyes. "Back to Grosvenor Square, my lord?" His coachman called. "Yes." James leaned back against the seat. "But tomorrow I want you to make some inquiries, discreetly, about a Miss Charlotte Hartley." He needed to understand what had driven that young woman into the rain alone, and why, when she'd looked at him with those wounded eyes, he'd felt something shift in his chest for the first time in 5 years. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. The bookshop on Chandler Street smelled of old leather and possibility. Charlotte ran her fingers along worn spines, searching for anything affordable that might fill the empty weeks ahead. Aunt Margaret had finally accepted that they must leave London, find some quiet village where Charlotte's ruined reputation wouldn't follow. But until then, Charlotte needed escape. She'd found 2 promising volumes when the bell above the door chimed. "Miss Hartley." Charlotte froze, recognizing the voice instantly. She turned slowly to find Lord Ravenwood in the doorway, looking decidedly out of place in the shabby little shop. He'd removed his hat, and rainwater glistened in his dark hair. "My lord." She dipped a curtsy, conscious of her plain day dress, her lack of chaperone. "I did not expect to encounter you here." "Nor I you." But something in his expression suggested otherwise. "I confess a weakness for books, particularly the sort of establishment where one might find unexpected treasures." He moved deeper into the shop, examining titles with what appeared to be genuine interest. Charlotte remained frozen, torn between fleeing and staying. The coat. She still had his coat, carefully cleaned and wrapped in paper at home. She should have sent it back immediately. "I have your coat," she blurted. "I meant to return it, but I didn't know where to send it, and I couldn't simply appear at your door." "I'm not concerned about the coat." Lord Ravenwood pulled a volume from the shelf, glanced at the cover, smiled slightly. "Byron. The Corsair. Do you enjoy Byron, Miss Hartley?" The question felt like a test. "I find him rather melodramatic." "As do I." His smile widened fractionally. "Though I suspect we're in the minority. What do you prefer?" "Shakespeare, Austen. Anything with honesty in it." "Not romance, then." "Shakespeare and Austen are full of romance, but they're also full of truth, the difference between love and infatuation, the cost of pride, the danger of first impressions." Charlotte stopped, conscious she was revealing too much. But Lord Ravenwood simply nodded. "Pride and prejudice. You find truth in Miss Elizabeth's journey. Don't you?" "I find truth in Mr. Darcy's struggle." He set the Byron back on the shelf. "The difficulty of changing when change seems impossible, of learning that what you believed about yourself might be wrong." They stood in the dusty aisle, surrounded by thousands of words written by other people, and Charlotte felt something shift between them. Understanding, recognition, the sense that they spoke the same language beneath their words. "I haven't been to a ball in 5 years," Lord Ravenwood said quietly. "I avoid society whenever possible. Most people find me cold, difficult, wedded to grief." Charlotte's breath caught. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you looked at me in the carriage last week as if I'd shown you extraordinary kindness, but all I did was offer basic human decency, which suggests you've received very little of it recently." He met her eyes directly. I know what it is to be judged by society, Miss Hartley. Perhaps not in the same way, but I know the weight of their censure nonetheless. You're a Marquess. Your circumstances cannot possibly— No, he agreed, but grief has its own form of exile, and I learned years ago that society's judgments rarely reflect the truth of things. The words hung between them like a bridge. Charlotte wanted to cross it desperately, wanted to tell him everything, the false accusations, the complete absence of any impropriety with Lord Pemberton, the way Lady Pemberton had destroyed her life over imagined threats. But the habit of silence held strong. Would you allow me to lend you books? Lord Ravenwood gestured to the volumes in her hands. My library at Ravenwood House has considerably more selection than this shop, and significantly better condition. You would be doing me a service, actually. Books should be read, not merely collected. I couldn't possibly impose— You wouldn't be. I rarely use the library anymore. Something sad flickered across his face. It reminds me too much of— Well, better the books serve someone who will appreciate them. Charlotte knew she should refuse, knew that accepting favours from a Marquess, particularly one who'd already shown her more kindness than she deserved, was dangerous. But the thought of unlimited books, of losing herself in stories while she waited for this nightmare to end, proved too tempting. If you're certain it wouldn't be an imposition. I'm certain. Lord Ravenwood moved toward the shop entrance. Shall we say Thursday afternoon? I'll have my carriage collect you, unless you prefer to walk in the rain again. Despite everything, Charlotte smiled. Thursday afternoon would be acceptable, my lord. James, he said quietly, when we're alone, you may call me James. He left before she could respond, the bell chiming his departure. Charlotte stood among the books, heart racing, wondering what she'd just agreed to. And why, for the first time in weeks, she felt something other than despair. She felt curious, interested, almost hopeful. It terrified her. Thursday arrived wrapped in grey clouds and intermittent drizzle. Charlotte dressed carefully in her best day gown, a simple muslin that had once been white, but had faded to cream. Aunt Margaret fussed over her hair, chattering nervously about the propriety of visiting a bachelor's home even with servants present. It's only to borrow books, Aunt. Books? Aunt Margaret adjusted a curl for the third time. And he's a Marquess, Charlotte. A young unmarried Marquess who showed you considerable attention. I'm not criticizing, dear. I'm simply saying, be careful with your heart. Charlotte had no intention of being anything but careful. Her heart was too battered for romantic fantasies. Lord Ravenwood, James, had shown her kindness. Nothing more. She would borrow his books, maintain appropriate distance, and when she left London, she would remember him as a brief, bright spot in an otherwise dark time. The carriage arrived promptly at 2. The ride to Grosvenor Square took only minutes, but it felt like crossing into another world. Ravenwood House stood imposing and elegant, all white stone and tall windows. A butler admitted her with no visible reaction to her unfashionable dress or lack of status. James waited in the library. The room stole Charlotte's breath. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, filled with more books than she'd seen in her life. Tall windows overlooked a rain-soaked garden. A fire crackled in an enormous hearth. And in the center of it all stood James, dressed more casually than she'd yet seen him, shirt sleeves visible beneath a dark waistcoat. Miss Hartley. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his austere features into something almost boyish. Welcome. I apologize for the informality. I wasn't expecting visitors beyond yourself, and the servants know I prefer comfort to fashion when I'm home. It's your home, my lord. You should be comfortable in it. James, he corrected gently. Please, I insist. Charlotte moved deeper into the library, running her hand along the spines of leather-bound volumes. This is extraordinary. How have you collected so many? Generations of Ashfords with more money than sense. James moved to stand beside her. My grandfather was particularly obsessed. He bought entire estates simply for their libraries. They spent an hour discussing books, what she'd read, what she'd longed to read but never could afford. James pulled volumes from shelves, shared passages he loved, listened intently when she explained why she preferred certain authors. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, as if they'd known each other far longer than a week. Finally, Charlotte worked up the courage to ask the question burning in her chest. Why are you doing this? The carriage, the books. You must have heard about my scandal by now. Everyone in London knows. James set down the volume he'd been holding. His expression shifted, became serious. I heard. I made inquiries. Charlotte's stomach dropped. Then you know what they say about me. That I attempted to seduce Lord Pemberton. That I wrote him letters. That I know what they say. James's voice remained steady. But I also know something of society's tendency to condemn quickly and question slowly. Tell me the truth, Charlotte, not what they say. What actually happened? The use of her Christian name should have shocked her. Instead, it felt natural. Right. Charlotte sank into a leather chair, suddenly exhausted. Nothing happened. I played pianoforte at a musicale. Lord Pemberton complimented my performance. He said I reminded him of his sister, who had died the previous year. That was all. 3 minutes of polite conversation in a room full of people. And Lady Pemberton? Saw her husband speaking with me. Invented an entire affair from nothing. Within a week, everyone believed I'd written passionate letters, stolen kisses in dark corners, plotted to ruin her marriage. Charlotte's hands trembled. I had no letters to prove my innocence, no powerful family to defend me. I was simply convenient, a nobody who could be destroyed without consequence. James knelt before her chair, his eyes intense. You are not a nobody. In their eyes, damn their eyes. The vehemence in his voice startled her. I'm sorry. Forgive my language. But I know something of being punished for crimes you didn't commit, Charlotte, of carrying guilt that belongs to others. And I won't allow you to believe their lies about yourself. What guilt do you carry? The question escaped before she could stop it. James stood, moved to the window, his back to her. Rain streaked the glass. My fiancée died 5 years ago. Eleanor. She was travelling to meet me for our wedding. Early spring, terrible weather. I insisted we keep the original date rather than wait. I was impatient, young, arrogant enough to believe I could control everything. It wasn't your fault, wasn't it? He turned to face her. She expressed concerns, asked if we might wait until the roads were safer. I told her she worried too much, that nothing would happen, and then her carriage overturned on a muddy road, and she died before anyone could reach her. Charlotte rose, crossed to him without thinking. You didn't kill her. Weather did. Chance did. Terrible random misfortune did. Yet I live with it every day. Society calls me the grieving Marquess. They think I avoid balls and parties out of romantic devotion. But the truth is I can't face them, can't endure their pity, can't bear the weight of expectations that I should have moved on by now. His voice dropped. You understand that, don't you? The impossibility of escaping what others decide you must be. Yes. Charlotte's throat tightened. Yes, I understand that completely. They stood close together, the rain and firelight creating a cocoon of intimacy. James reached for her hand, held it gently. You and I, Charlotte, we've both been punished for things beyond our control, condemned by people who know nothing of truth. Perhaps that's why I stopped for you that night, because I recognized the weight you carried. And that's why you're helping me? Out of shared misery? No. He lifted her hand, pressed it briefly against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong. "I'm helping you because you're the first person in 5 years who looked at me and didn't offer platitudes or false comfort. You simply understood, and that is rarer than you know." Charlotte should have pulled away, should have maintained proper distance. But his hand was warm, and his eyes held no pity or judgment, and she was so desperately tired of being alone in her pain. "What happens when I leave London?" she whispered. "When I'm gone and you're alone again? Then I'll miss the most honest person I've ever met." James released her hand slowly, as if reluctant. "But I won't keep you here if leaving is what you need." The words felt like a door opening, a choice offered rather than demanded. Charlotte returned to her chair, accepting the stack of books James selected for her. They spoke of other things: poetry, London's wretched weather, the oddities of English society. But beneath the conversation ran an undercurrent of something deeper, something neither of them was quite ready to name. When the carriage took her home, Charlotte clutched the books against her chest and tried not to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment. But hope flickered anyway, stubborn and persistent as flame. James stood at the window and watched the carriage disappear. His chest ached in a way it hadn't for 5 years. Not the sharp agony of grief, but something else. Something that felt almost like longing. He'd made a terrible mistake. He'd allowed Charlotte Hartley into his library, into his life, into the careful isolation he'd maintained since Eleanor's death. And now he couldn't stop thinking about her, about the courage it took to keep walking through the rain, about the intelligence in her eyes when she discussed literature, about the way she'd touched his arm so gently when he'd spoken of Eleanor. "My lord?" His friend Edward, Lord Hartwell, appeared in the doorway. "I received your message. What's so urgent?" James gestured to the chairs. Edward settled in, eyebrows raised in curiosity. They'd known each other since Eton, and Edward was one of the few people who'd never treated James's grief like an inconvenience. "I need you to tell me everything you know about Charlotte Hartley's scandal." Edward's expression turned cautious. "Why?" "Because I need to understand what happened, and I need to know if there's any truth to the accusations." "There isn't." Edward spoke with certainty. "I was at the musical where it supposedly began. I saw the interaction with Pemberton. It was entirely innocent. But Dorothea Pemberton is a jealous harpy who sees threats everywhere. She latched onto Miss Hartley because the girl had no protection, no influential family, no one to defend her." Fury rose in James's throat. So she destroyed an innocent woman's reputation based on nothing. "Welcome to London society." Edward studied him carefully. "Why do you care about this particular injustice? We both know the ton ruins reputations daily." "Because I know her, and she doesn't deserve this." "You know her?" Edward leaned forward. "James, what's going on?" James told him about the night in the rain, the bookshop, the afternoon in his library. Edward listened without interruption, his expression growing more concerned. "You're falling for her," Edward said finally. "I'm not." James stopped, reconsidered. "I don't know what I'm doing. You're coming back to life, which is good, necessary even. Eleanor wouldn't have wanted you to isolate yourself forever." Edward paused. "But you need to be careful. Miss Hartley has been badly hurt. If you're only offering comfort out of guilt or some misguided attempt at redemption—" "I'm not." "Then what are you offering?" James had no answer. He wanted to say he was offering friendship, companionship, shared understanding. But he knew it was more than that, knew that when Charlotte had stood close to him, when she'd looked at him with those wounded, hopeful eyes, he'd wanted to promise her everything. Safety, protection, a life free from the cruelty of society's judgment. He'd wanted to promise her love, but he'd failed to protect Eleanor. What right did he have to make promises to another woman? I don't know, James admitted. But I need to do something. I can't let her leave London believing she's worthless, that she deserved what happened. Then clear her name, publicly. Make Pemberton admit the truth. She won't want that. James thought of Charlotte's fierce pride, her refusal to be anyone's charity case. She'll see it as pity. Then what will you do? James stared into the fire. What could he do? How could he help Charlotte without making her feel like a project? How could he show her she mattered without making her believe he only valued her as redemption for his own failures? 2 days later, the answer arrived unexpectedly. James attended his club, a rare occurrence, but Edward had insisted he couldn't hide forever. They sat in the corner, brandy ignored, when Lord Pemberton stumbled past their table. The man was clearly drunk, his face flushed, his movements uncoordinated. Pemberton collapsed into a nearby chair, laughing at some private joke. "Women," he announced to no one in particular. "Can't live with them, can't," he hiccuped. "Can't convince them you're not guilty even when you're completely innocent." James's hand tightened on his glass. "Your wife still jealous, Pemberton?" Someone called from across the room, laughing. "Dorothea?" Pemberton waved dismissively. Invented an entire affair in her head. That Hartley girl. Never touched her. Never even thought about it. But try telling Dorothea that. She sees threats in every woman who speaks to me. The room went very quiet. Pemberton, too drunk to notice, continued. "Ruined the poor girl over nothing. Absolute nothing." But Dorothea insisted, and what could I do? Can't contradict one's wife publicly, can one? James stood slowly. Edward grabbed his arm. "Don't." He just admitted she's innocent. James's voice shook with fury. He destroyed Charlotte's entire life, and he's laughing about it. He's drunk. He won't remember saying it. Then we'll make sure others do. James pulled free and crossed to Pemberton. "Lord Pemberton, I wonder if you might repeat what you just said. Clearly, so there's no misunderstanding." Pemberton squinted up at him. "Ravenwood. Didn't know you came here anymore. Thought you were too busy grieving." "About Miss Hartley," James pressed. "You said she was innocent." "Course she's innocent." Pemberton laughed again. "Never did anything. Dorothea just can't help herself. Sees conspiracies everywhere. So you admit you and your wife destroyed Miss Hartley's reputation over a completely fabricated scandal?" Something in James's tone penetrated Pemberton's drunken haze. "Now see here. No, you see here." James leaned down, voice low and dangerous. "You will go home. You will speak to your wife. And you will make this right. Do I make myself clear? You can't tell me. I can, and I will, because Miss Charlotte Hartley is going to be my wife, which makes her reputation my concern. And trust me, Pemberton, you do not want to discover what I'm capable of when someone threatens what's mine." The club erupted in shocked whispers. Edward's eyes widened. And James realized with perfect clarity what he'd just done. He'd claimed Charlotte publicly, made his intentions clear before even speaking to her about them, forced the issue through sheer arrogance and rage, exactly as he'd done 5 years ago with Eleanor. James left the club and walked into the rain, panic clawing at his throat. What had he done? He'd wanted to protect Charlotte, not trap her, wanted to clear her name, not bind her to him through society's expectations. But he'd just announced an engagement that didn't exist, made promises she hadn't asked for. He had to tell her, had to explain, had to give her the choice he'd stolen by opening his mouth before thinking. James climbed into his carriage and gave Charlotte's address, his heart pounding. This time, he wouldn't presume. This time, he would ask. But when he arrived at the modest townhouse, Charlotte's aunt answered the door, her face pale. "My lord, Charlotte isn't here. She's—" The older woman's voice broke. "She's leaving, tonight. We couldn't afford to stay any longer, and she said she couldn't bear another day of this. She's walking to the coaching inn now." "Walking?" James stared. "In this weather, without even a carriage. We sold what little we had, my lord. There's no money for carriages." Tears streamed down the woman's face. "My poor girl, my poor brave girl." James was back in his carriage before the woman finished speaking, shouting directions to his coachman. They had to find her. He had to explain. Had to tell her what he'd done at the club, what he'd claimed, what he wanted. Had to tell her he loved her before she disappeared from his life forever. The rain fell harder, turning the streets into rivers. And somewhere in this storm, Charlotte was walking alone, believing she was worthless, believing no one cared if she stayed or went. James swore he would find her. And this time, he wouldn't let pride or fear stop him from telling her the truth. Charlotte walked through rain that felt like divine punishment. Her traveling case grew heavier, with each step, her sodden cloak clinging to her shoulders. The coaching inn lay 2 miles ahead, where she would board a mail coach headed north. Away from London, away from scandal, away from everything, away from James. She shouldn't think of him as James. She should maintain proper distance in her mind, if nowhere else. But after that afternoon in his library, after the way he'd held her hand and shared his pain, formal address felt wrong. He'd seen her. Really seen her. Not the scandal or the ruined reputation, but Charlotte herself. And now she'd never see him again. The sound of hooves on cobblestones barely registered through her misery. The carriage appeared beside her like an apparition, and Charlotte's heart stopped when the door flew open. James practically fell out, coatless, hair plastered to his skull, eyes wild. "Charlotte, thank God!" "My lord, what are you—" "Don't." He crossed to her in 2 strides. "Don't call me my lord. Not now. Not when I've been driving through every street in London trying to find you before you disappeared." Rain poured between them. Charlotte clutched her case. "You shouldn't be here." "I absolutely should be here." James took her case, set it down, captured both her hands in his. "I need to tell you something, several things, and I need you to listen before you decide I'm completely mad. I'm going to miss my coach." "Good, because you're not getting on it." He must have seen her expression because he quickly added, "I'm sorry, that came out wrong. I'm not forbidding you from anything. I'm asking, begging if necessary. Please, Charlotte, please just listen." Water dripped from his nose. His shirt was transparent, clinging to his chest. He looked nothing like a Marquess, and everything like a man desperate enough to chase a woman through a storm. Charlotte's resolve wavered. "What could you possibly have to say that requires this level of theatrics? I love you." The words hit her like a physical blow. Charlotte stumbled backward. "You don't. You can't." "I absolutely can, and I do." James stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his warmth despite the cold rain. "I know it's been less than 2 weeks. I know it's improbable and sudden and completely irrational. But I also know that you're the first person in 5 years who made me want to participate in life again, who made me laugh, who understood my pain without trying to fix it. You're confusing gratitude with love. I'm not. I've had 5 years to understand the difference." His eyes held hers, fierce and certain. "You terrify me, Charlotte, because caring about you means risking loss again, means opening myself up to all the pain I've been avoiding. But not caring about you, letting you walk away believing you're worthless, that terrifies me more." Tears mixed with rain on Charlotte's face. "You don't know what you're saying. I'm ruined. My reputation is about to be restored." James smiled grimly. "I went to my club tonight. Lord Pemberton was there, drunk. He admitted everything, Charlotte. Admitted his wife fabricated the entire scandal. Admitted you never did anything wrong. Everyone heard. Charlotte's knees weakened. He what? Confessed. Publicly. The truth will be all over London by morning. James touched her face gently, thumb wiping away tears. But I didn't tell you that first because I don't want you to stay for your reputation. I want you to stay for me. For us. There is no us. There can't be. Why not? Because you're trying to save me. The words exploded from Charlotte's chest. You couldn't save your fiancé, so now you want to save me. But I'm not a project, James. I'm not your redemption. The accusation hung between them, sharp and cutting. James flinched as if she'd struck him. Then his expression shifted, not to anger but to something rawer. Understanding. You're right. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. You're absolutely right. I did want to save you, at first. When I stopped the carriage that night, when I offered you books, yes, part of me wanted to fix something I couldn't fix 5 years ago. Charlotte tried to pull away, but he held her hands gently, refusing to let go. But then I spent an hour talking with you about books. James continued. And I realized you didn't need saving. You needed someone to see you. And somewhere between Shakespeare and your terrible opinion of Byron, I stopped wanting to save you and started wanting to know you, to hear you laugh, to watch you argue about literature with that passionate fire in your eyes. That doesn't change. I fell in love with you, Charlotte. Not with the idea of rescuing you, with you, your intelligence, your courage, the way you keep walking through storms, even when it would be easier to surrender. His grip tightened. You looked at my grief and didn't try to fix it or dismiss it. You simply understood. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious? Rowan soaked them both to the bone. Charlotte's resolve crumbled piece by piece under the weight of his words, his eyes, his absolute certainty. What if I'm not who you think I am? She whispered. What if you're wrong about me? Then I'll spend the rest of my life learning who you really are, and loving every discovery. James took a shaking breath. But I need you to believe me. I'm not offering you this because you need rescue. I'm offering because I need you. Because the thought of going back to that empty house, that isolated existence, feels impossible now that I know what it's like to feel alive again. Your club. Charlotte seized on the detail, trying to think through the chaos in her chest. You said Pemberton confessed at your club. What exactly did you do? James had the grace to look sheepish. I may have informed several dozen witnesses that you were going to be my wife, before actually asking you. You what? I was angry. He was laughing about destroying your life. I wasn't thinking clearly. James pulled her closer, desperate now. I know I should have asked first, should have given you choice. But Charlotte, I meant it. Every word. I want you to be my wife, not because society expects it now, not because I've compromised you, but because I love you, because I want to wake up every morning and hear your opinions on books, because I want to argue about poetry and walk through gardens and build a life that's ours. You're mad, Charlotte said, but her voice broke on the words. Completely, since the moment you refused to get in my carriage. He smiled through the rain. Say yes, Charlotte, or say you need time, or tell me to leave you alone forever. But please don't leave London believing you're worthless. Don't leave believing no one loves you, because I do. Desperately, inconveniently, completely. Charlotte looked at him. This Marquess standing in the rain, soaked and shivering, looking at her as if she held his entire future in her hands. And she realized something extraordinary. She believed him, not because she was naive or desperate, but because she'd seen his isolation, his carefully maintained walls. And he'd torn them all down for her, had chased her through a storm, had risked his reputation and dignity to tell her she mattered. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "So am I." "What if it doesn't work? What if—" James pressed his forehead to hers, his breath warm against her face despite the cold rain. "Then we'll fail together. But Charlotte, what if it does work? What if we get everything we never dared hope for?" The question hung between them, full of possibility and promise. Charlotte thought of her empty future, the years of loneliness stretching ahead. Then she thought of James's library, his smile when she'd argued about Byron, the way he'd shared his grief without shame. She thought of how, for the first time in weeks, she'd felt seen. "I don't want a quiet life," she said finally. "I don't want to be hidden away." "Good, neither do I, not anymore." James pulled back slightly, eyes searching hers. "I want to take you to balls and show you off. Want to argue about books in public and scandalize people with how much I obviously adore my wife. Want everyone to know that Charlotte Hartley, soon to be Charlotte Ashford, is the most remarkable woman in England. That's absurd. It's the truth." He smiled. "Say yes." Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. At this man who'd stopped his carriage for a stranger, who'd offered books instead of pity, who'd loved her not despite her wounds, but with full knowledge of them. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." James kissed her then, right there in the rain, right in the middle of the street. It was soft and desperate and perfect. When they parted, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers again. "I need to do something first," he said quietly. "Something public, to make absolutely certain society understands what you mean to me." "What are you planning?" His smile turned wicked. "Do you trust me?" Charlotte thought of everything that had brought them to this moment. The rain, the ruin, the unexpected redemption. Surprisingly, yes. "Then come with me." James lifted her into the carriage, muddy travelling case and all, and called an address to his coachman. Charlotte recognized it immediately. Her stomach dropped. "James, that's the Pemberton house, yes." His eyes glinted with something dangerous and delighted. "They're hosting a ball tonight, one of the season's largest." "You cannot possibly mean—" "Oh, but I do." James took her hand, laced their fingers together. "You were expelled from a ballroom, Charlotte. So I'm going to dance with you, publicly, in front of everyone who condemned you. And I'm going to make absolutely certain they understand that you are mine, that I am yours, and that anyone who disrespects you answers to me." "That's insane. That's love." He kissed her knuckles. "Let them see what they almost destroyed. Let them see what I'm lucky enough to have found." The carriage stopped in front of the Pemberton mansion. Light blazed from every window. Music drifted into the rainy night. Charlotte's pulse raced with equal parts terror and exhilaration. "We're soaked," she pointed out weakly. "I know." James opened the door, stepped out into the rain, turned to face her with his hand extended. "Dance with me anyway?" Charlotte looked at his hand, steady despite the rain, strong despite the vulnerability in his eyes. She thought of all the ballrooms that had closed their doors to her, all the people who'd turned away, and she thought of this one man who'd run through a storm to find her. Charlotte placed her hand in his and stepped down into the rain. The Pemberton mansion blazed ahead, full of the same people who'd condemned her. But James stood beside her, his hand warm around hers, his eyes full of promises. They walked to the center of the street, just beyond the circle of light from the mansion windows. "Here?" Charlotte asked, bewildered. "Here." James pulled her close, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. Can you hear the music? Charlotte listened. The orchestra inside played a waltz, muffled by rain and walls, but still audible. Yes. Then dance with me, Charlotte Hartley. Dance with me in the rain while they watch from their warm ballrooms. Show them you don't need their approval. Show them you have something better. He swept her into the waltz. It was absurd. Completely, utterly absurd. They were both soaked through, her hem dragging in puddles, his hair dripping water. But James held her as if they danced in the finest ballroom in London, leading her through steps with practiced grace. Charlotte laughed, a real laugh, bright and genuine. You're completely mad. You said that already. James spun her, grinning. But you're still dancing. Movement at the mansion windows caught Charlotte's eye, faces pressed against glass. Shock, confusion, scandal written across every expression. She saw Lady Pemberton appear, her face contorting with fury, saw other women whispering behind fans, saw men gathering to watch the spectacle. Let them watch. James guided her through another turn, and Charlotte realized she didn't care what they thought anymore. Didn't care about their judgment or their condemnation. She was dancing in the rain with a Marquess who loved her, who saw her, who chose her over every respectable, scandal-free woman in London. The front door of the mansion flew open. Lady Pemberton appeared on the steps, face twisted with outrage. "Lord Ravenwood, what is the meaning of this display?" James didn't stop dancing. He simply raised his voice to Carrie. "I'm dancing with my fiancée, Lady Pemberton. Surely you don't object to that?" Gasps echoed from the growing crowd at the windows and door. "Your fiancé?" Lady Pemberton's voice rose to a shriek. "That woman is the future Marchioness of Ravenwood." James's tone turned dangerous. His steps never faltered, but Charlotte felt the steel in his grip. "And I would advise you to consider your next words very carefully. Miss Hartley has already endured enough slander based on your fabrications." "Fabrications. I never," your husband confessed, tonight, at his club, before 36 witnesses. James finally stopped dancing, though he kept Charlotte close against him. "Everyone knows the truth now, Lady Pemberton, that you destroyed an innocent woman's reputation over your own jealous delusions, that there was never any affair, never any letters, nothing but your malicious lies." The silence was absolute. Even the rain seemed to quiet. Lady Pemberton's face drained of colour. "So I suggest," James continued, voice carrying to every ear, "that you extend Miss Hartley the apology she deserves, publicly, now, before I make it my personal mission to ensure every door in London closes to you as they once closed to her." Lady Pemberton opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Lord Pemberton appeared behind her, looking ill. "Dorothea, please. I told you we needed to fix this." "I will not apologize to that. Then you will answer to me." James's voice could have frozen the rain itself. "Miss Hartley is going to be my wife, which means an insult to her is an insult to me and to my family. And the Ashford family, Lady Pemberton, has considerably more influence than yours. Think very carefully about whether your pride is worth social ruin." Charlotte watched Lady Pemberton's face cycle through rage, fear, calculation. Finally, grudgingly, the woman looked at Charlotte. "I may have been mistaken about certain events." "Not good enough." James's grip tightened protectively on Charlotte's waist. Lady Pemberton's jaw clenched. "I apologize, Miss Hartley, for any distress my misunderstanding may have caused." It wasn't a real apology, but it was public, witnessed by dozens of London's elite. And it was, Charlotte realized, enough. Not for forgiveness. She might never forgive the destruction Lady Pemberton had caused, but enough for society to reconsider their judgment. Enough for Charlotte to walk forward without their condemnation, chaining her to the past. "Thank you," Charlotte said simply. Then, before James could say anything else, she turned to him. "Take me home." His expression softened immediately. "Yours or mine? I suppose that's the same place now, isn't it?" James's smile broke like sunrise. Yes, it is." He guided her back to the carriage, ignoring the stares and whispers. Charlotte glanced back once at the mansion, at all those faces watching from windows. They looked smaller somehow, less important. Inside the carriage, James pulled her close. Charlotte burrowed into his warmth, shivering now that the adrenaline had faded. "That was the most ridiculous thing I've ever witnessed," she said against his chest. "I thought it was rather romantic. Dancing in the rain in front of your enemies. Dancing in the rain with you." James kissed the top of her head. "Though I confess I'm freezing now." Charlotte laughed. "What a pair we make. Both soaked, both scandal-ridden, both completely mad." "Both free." James tilted her face up to his. "For the first time in years, Charlotte, I feel free. Free of grief's chains, free of society's expectations, free to simply live and love without apology." "I love you," Charlotte said, testing the words. They felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. "I don't think I've ever said that to anyone before." "Then I'm honored to be the first." James kissed her softly. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life ensuring you never regret it." The carriage rolled through London's rain-slicked streets, carrying them toward Grosvenor Square and the mansion that would become Charlotte's home. Tomorrow there would be wedding plans and social calls and the delicate work of rebuilding her reputation. Tomorrow they would face London society together. But tonight, wrapped in each other's arms, still dripping rainwater onto expensive upholstery, Charlotte and James simply held each other. Two wounded souls who'd found healing in unexpected places. Two people who'd walked through storms and come out stronger. Two hearts that had found their home in each other. "James," Charlotte murmured as the carriage turned onto his street. Next time you want to make a public declaration, perhaps warn me first?" He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Where would be the fun in that?" "I'm serious. My poor heart can't take much more drama." "Then I'll make you a promise." James pulled back to look at her, his expression tender. "From now on, the only storms we weather will be actual storms. No more social scandals, no more public confrontations. Just you and me, our library, and whatever life brings us." "That sounds perfect. Though I reserve the right to occasionally dance with you in the rain." Charlotte smiled. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The carriage stopped. A footman appeared with an umbrella, but James waved him off. "We're already soaked. No point in pretending otherwise." They walked into Ravenwood House, hand in hand, leaving puddles on marble floors, completely unconcerned with propriety or appearances. The butler's expression remained professionally neutral, though Charlotte caught a hint of warmth in his eyes when James introduced her as his future wife. "Prepare the blue suite for Miss Hartley," James instructed, "and send word to her aunt that she's safe and will remain here tonight. With proper chaperones, of course." "Of course, my lord." James led Charlotte to the library. Their library now, she supposed. A fire had been lit against the evening chill. He wrapped her in a thick blanket and pulled her down beside him on the settee. "Are you warm enough?" he asked, tucking the blanket around her. "Getting there." Charlotte leaned against him, exhausted and exhilarated. "I still can't believe you did that, any of it." "Which part? Proposing in the rain? Confronting Lady Pemberton? Dancing in the street like a madman?" "All of it." Charlotte looked up at him. "You gave up your privacy for me, your carefully maintained isolation. Everyone will be talking about this for weeks. Good. Let them talk. James kissed her forehead. I spent 5 years hiding from life, Charlotte, from connection and risk and possibility, and then you stumbled into my carriage soaked and stubborn and utterly magnificent, and I realized what I'd been missing. I don't want to hide any more. What do you want? You. Always you. He smiled. And perhaps a quiet wedding. I've had enough public spectacle for one lifetime. Charlotte laughed. Says the man who just proposed in the street and danced in front of half of London society. That was necessary drama. Our wedding should be intimate, just us and the people who matter. And about 300 aristocrats who'll expect invitations. James groaned. We could elope. We absolutely could not. You're a Marquess. These things are done properly. When did you become so conventional? When I agreed to marry a Marquess. Charlotte snuggled closer. Besides, I want Aunt Margaret to see me married, to know I found happiness despite everything. Then we'll have the biggest, most ostentatious wedding London has ever seen, if that's what you want. I don't want that at all. I want what you said, intimate, meaningful, ours. Charlotte paused. But I would like to dance. At our wedding. In a proper ballroom this time, not in the rain. I'll dance with you every day if you wish. James's voice softened. Every morning, every evening, every moment you'll have me. They sat in comfortable silence, watching flames dance in the hearth. Outside, rain continued its endless percussion. But inside, wrapped in warmth and each other, Charlotte felt something she'd never expected to feel again. Peace, belonging, home. James? She said quietly. Yes, love. Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me, for being completely, wonderfully mad enough to chase me through a storm. He turned her face to his, eyes serious. Charlotte Hartley, soon to be Charlotte Ashford, you have nothing to thank me for. You saved me every bit as much as I saved you. More, perhaps. You brought me back to life. Then we saved each other. Yes. James kissed her, soft and slow and full of promise. We did. The fire crackled. Rain drummed against windows, and two people who'd been condemned by society, wounded by circumstance, and broken by injustice found what they'd been missing all along. Not salvation from an outside source, not redemption through grand gestures, but love, messy and imperfect and utterly real. The kind of love that danced in rainstorms and faced down scandals. The kind that saw wounds and loved anyway. The kind that transformed two isolated souls into something stronger together than they'd ever been apart. And as Charlotte drifted toward sleep in James's arms, safe and warm and finally free, she thought that perhaps storms weren't only about destruction. Sometimes storms brought exactly what you needed. Sometimes they brought you home.